Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night, which means it's your chance to ask me any question you like, and I'm going to try and help you on your property development journey. Now, in order to do that, what we ask you to do is to please click on the links below, propdev.info/open-mic, submitting your question, chance to prepare for any curly questions that you might be sticking in my direction. Now, that said, we've got a cracking show ahead of us, but first let me tell you about the fact that we not only run these Sunday sessions, but we also run physical events all the way around the country. We run these in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide, about any tick of the clock. So that means that we're going to be running a meetup on 55 weekends of the year. That is a cracking number of shows. That's industry experts, town planners, civil engineers, architects and the like. And it's also members of our community sharing with you real deals. So that's the good, the bad and the ugly. Progress your property journey by following in the footsteps of others. Plus, we then have masterminding, and we always kick on socially for drinks. So it is a fantastic event and very, very well worthwhile. Now, that said, we've got a cracking show ahead of us. All sorts of questions from all different, from very, very beginners to very, very advanced questions. So let's see what we've got. Now, our very, very first question comes from Alan. Now, Alan's actually got multiple questions here. It's very clear from the nature of Alan's questions that he's very early in the journey of his very first deal. So I'll ask his first question first. Now, he says, in order to avoid delays in settling and get the title for subdivision, say I've got 4 townhouses that I want to develop, what are the steps required in order to get the titles? I know that we need to get a plan of subdivision. In Victoria, this is called SPIA. Can you talk about this so that we know division ASAP in order to avoid the delay on settlement? Now, here's the challenge here, Alan. That is at the end of the process, whereas what you're asking for is a delay at settlement at the start. You can't get a plan of subdivision approved, or you can't get a plan of subdivision executed until you actually have the development approval. And if you're building townhouses, you actually have to build the townhouses first, comply with all the development approval conditions, then lodge that, to SPIA, as you've rightly said, then get the titles at the end. Then it's actually then take that through to settlement sale of the finish. I understand you're trying to get that understanding right at the very, very beginning, but you've got a long way to go. You've still got to get what is your design. You've got to lodge that through to development approval in the first place. You've got to take that out to tender, construct that, then comply with all development approval. Then what they call plan sealing, where you check every single one of those development approval conditions and you submit that through to council. Make sure that they stamp that to say, yes, you have met every single one of them. Then you take that to SPIA, then you get the titles, then you can settle at the very end. Some little tricks aware of that, given that all of that happens at the tail end of the project, mate, you are at peak debt at this point in time. And so there's little things like your electrical certificates and like your NBN certificates and things like that, that are relatively minor in nature, and sometimes up to 6 months to actually get approved and get those certificates installed and approved. So very worthwhile. As soon as you get your development approval conditions, go through the entire list, map that out and start the process of even what looks like minor insignificant ones, because that are the trip hazards that are going to hold you up at the very, very end. So now that said, he's clearly planning all the way for the very end. So well done, Alan. His next question says, if I want to sell these off the plan, what are the bare minimum that I need to consider in order to sell off the plan? E.g. 3D renders, approved planning permits, floor plans, plan of subdivision, etc. Is there anything else? So the answer is yes, there will be plenty. So in order to sell off the plan, you firstly need to have a development approval, because otherwise there's no certainty that what you're actually going to sell is what you're actually able to deliver. So you need to wait until you've got the development approval at minimum. At that point in time, you need to understand what all your fixtures and fittings and the quality of the build is going to be. Map that out. So what kind of taps, what kind of tiles, carpets, what does your cabinetry look like, all those sorts of things. Then and only then do you get your, because the 3D renders need to represent what it is that you're actually trying to sell. Now, your pre-sale contract would then capture what is the proposed floor plan and what is the proposed lot sizes and the proposed I guess fixtures and things and that sort of thing. Small amount of variation that is allowed, because from time to time when you try to get a particular tap or a particular tile, it won't be available in the shop, and so there'll be some minor conditions in that plan, plan of sale, that in that pre-sale contract, I should say, that do allow for some minor variations without terminating the contract. Now, given that all of that is the case, it's going to take some time to finish the construction, get your titles before you can actually get to settlement. And there are times where, for whatever reason, builders stall, I guess developers run out of cash, those sorts of things, sometimes never completes. So there has to be a condition within a pre-sale contract called a sunset clause. Now, the sunset clause allows for the fact that if the delay is too long, then that purchaser that is purchasing off the plan has the ability to exit the contract without penalty, because you've not been able to execute that. Now, once upon a time, that sunset clause used to be a two-way clause, whereas in the favor of both developer and the purchaser, and that if time ran out, that even the developer could terminate. But state by state, that is slowly being whittled away. So net power is purchaser. And the reason for that is that some developers were using that to, I guess, delay a contract far enough to force the contract to be able to be terminated when the markets were going up, and that way they could terminate the cheaper sale and relist the same property at a more expensive price point. Now, governments across the country have woken up to that fact, and state by state they are turning that off. So you need to be very aware of the particular state that you're actually trying to do that in, as to whether or not that is something that is in your state. But just assume that it is a one-way contract. Now, what that means is you have to be very, very clear in exactly what you're going to deliver. So if you don't know what it is you're going to deliver, if you don't have your proposed plan of subdivision at this point, and you don't have your development approval conditions and that sort of thing, then it's too early in the process to go out for sale at this moment. But it is certainly something that, as you get your development approval plans, or your plans that you are lodging for development approval, then you want to start getting your fixtures and fittings ready to go. So as soon as you get your DA conditions, you know exactly what you can do with regards to going to market and rendering and all those sorts of things. So careful, that sunset clause date can be a little bit of a trip hazard. Now, if you are in a rising market is going up, then selling off the plan will actually cap the sale price. And what you might find is you might sell it off the plan today, and then because it's going to take you 12 months or so to actually do the construction, then you might find that the value of that property has actually gone up significantly because the market's gone up. So that may not necessarily be in your favor if you're going to do that. Now, conversely, if the market is going down, what it does is it locks price in, property value goes down, then you've locked in your certainty. So pre-sale contracts are a risk mitigation strategy. So if you are somebody who has a high risk tolerance, you may choose to not do the pre-sale, or perhaps your funder has a high risk tolerance and they may say that they don't need the pre-sale, in which case you could ride the market and maybe get an uplift. But be very, very careful. If the market is going down, then you want to make sure that you've done enough pre-sales to lock in your profits, and that is super important. Now, Alan's got a third question, a very, very last one from Alan. How do I source a good builder that's reliable, price competitive, and with a reputation? And what are the best ways to find interior design consultants, architects, etc., I guess, for the project after site acquisition? So there are two questions built into the one. So firstly, your architect is going to help you to find an appropriate interior designer. Often the architects have in-house interior design, I guess, capabilities. So just talk to your architect first go, is kind of where I would start with that side of things. They would have designed the product for a particular demographic. So make sure that your product and demographic are perfect. Go out for builders. The first thing you should actually do is become an area expert, know what builders are actually constructing in the area. Now, you've got different kinds of builders. You've got project builders who specialize in doing the same design again and again and again. And you will get some very pricing and very installation, and they've got some efficiencies with the purchase price, but they're not very good at doing custom and bespoke designs. Okay, then you've got your bespoke builders. So your bespoke builders will actually do this from a custom design every single time. Now, because they can do any design that you actually come up with, and that is then going to, allow them to, they'll be a little bit more expensive, but they'll be able to build absolutely anything you want to do. Now, my strong guidance here from an industry perspective is we need to move away from design bespoke solutions every single time. The reason being that our building and construction industry is at a tipping point where we're starting to lose labor and we're starting to lose builders to the industry, and we need to help them to actually do more efficient construction methodology using what is called modern methods of construction. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you is when you engage your architect, you need to ask them specifically to design for manufactured assembly, DFMA, design for manufactured assembly. Now, if you do that, that means that the design can use one technologies to actually fast track the construction of the dwelling. Okay. Excuse me. Now, this doesn't exclude the fact that you can use a custom and bespoke builder, but what it means is the builder now has choices. Do they want to do that with the traditional method, or do they want to move to these new modern methods of construction? Now, you've got 4 different technologies, as I've touched on. You've got panelized construction. You've got kit of parts, where we're pretty much picking everything from a catalog and assembling a house from those catalog parts. Then we've also got volumetric, where it looks a little bit like a cube. We can actually assemble those modules together and actually form a house. It might be 6, 7, 8 cubes to actually make a house, but everything's actually built in a factory. And then lastly, we have what they call additive construction, which is 3D printing of houses and everything. Modular assembly, you can use one or multiple of those technologies together in your house. And you can stand the frame of the house up and have a watertight shell, sometimes is in as little as 2 or 3 days. Now, if you've got a completely watertight house in 2 to 3 days with the windows in, with the, interior and exterior doors and that sort of thing, then your builder and all the trades can come in and fit that house out as quick as humanly possible. Now, it's using very similar techniques to what we've actually been doing, where sometimes you'll see a frame turning up, already pre-constructed, but it's just taking that a little step further and actually saying, well, what we're going to do is actually have frames. We're also going to have cladding. Sometimes we can have insulation. Sometimes we can have all the rough-ins done for the electrical and the plumbing and those sorts of things. And it just means that when the trades actually turn up, the finishing trades turn up, then they can turn up to site and they can start and finish in one go. They're not going to come and go because the project is not progressing fast enough. Now, in your instance, you're doing 4 townhouses. Wouldn't it be fantastic if you could have the Sparky turn up day 1 and do all of the fit out, all the rough unit 1, and then the next day move to unit 2, and the next day move to unit 3. And as they move to unit 2, then the plumber comes in on unit 1 and he starts doing his rough in. And then when the tradie goes to, when the Sparky goes to unit 3, the plumber goes to unit 2, and the plasterer comes in on unit 1. So very, very efficient construction methodologies as they start to roll these things out. And then the chippy will come in and do all the, all the cabinetry and those sorts of things. So we can get very, very fast in our construction, still using the same high quality trades that we're using before. What it is doing is get a shell of the house stood up in a much faster timeline. I strongly suggest that as an industry, we need to be moving towards that as quick as humanly possible, because otherwise we're going to get to a point where builders taking 12 months to build a home are going to very much struggle. Whereas if we do modern methods of construction, I've seen 12 townhouse projects completed in as little as 12 weeks. Now, if you can do that, same quality build, gonna sneeze, hang on. Oh, excuse me, folks. You're gonna use the same tradies doing the same things, but they're just coming in and being very efficient and very effective. Means that they can their time driving between sites and the inefficient use of that. And so they can start at one end and go to the other, and it's a much better way. And we, as an industry, now start to need to move that. Now, one of the other things I said was kit of parts. So kit of parts is using standardized things like standardized glazing and glass, sliding glass doors and that sort of thing. If we use standard sizes instead of custom and bespoke sizes every single time, then we don't need to have wait times while the manufacturer, I guess, waits in a queue for our custom size to be built. Standard off-the-shelf sizes for our windows and for our glass enclosures and things like that, and for our bathrooms and standard bathroom designs. We're going to start to have catalog items we can draw off the shelf and just go and install first go, and that's going to speed up our construction timelines immensely. So anyway, Alan, hope you got plenty from that. Next question comes from Angela. Angela says, hi, Rob. I'm a property investor and noticed that my cash flow is getting tighter as I expand my portfolio. I'm hoping that development is the way to continue to grow increasing income. Could you give me an idea of how much funding would typically required for a 1-into-2 lot subdivision? Thank you very much. Angela, what is super interesting here is that when we start to transition from property investing to property development, we start to see that there are many different ways to actually fund a deal. In a property investing world, we've been indoctrinated into residential lending. Okay, so put a 20% deposit down, have our serviceability, and prove that we can fund a loan over 20 or 30 years. From a property development perspective, we are typically doing projects. Sometimes, you've got a one. That project might take somewhere between 6 and 9 months. So we're not going to have the attractiveness of a residential lender wanting to lend us for 30 years if we're going to be finished the project in 6 or 9 months, because they're not going to get 30 years worth of interest. So we need to start to think differently with regards to how we fund small projects like that. And there are multiple ways to actually do this. But because we're manufacturing profits, then we can force value onto the deal, and we will have a numerous number of ways that we can actually, fund the project by controlling it rather. And that's the key. If we can control it and not own it, then we don't need anywhere near as much cash. Now, in a traditional project, you would have a deposit. Then you would also have serviceability to fund the debt, and you would also have liquid cash to run the deal. But if you are forcing can control it, we may need the deposit, we may or may not need the serviceability, and we may only need the liquid cash to run the deal. So for example, if I did a joint venture with the landowner, I'm not buying it off them, it's staying in their name, and I'm doing a profit split with them. So now it's just the liquid cash to run the deal. If, however, I'm doing a contract, I might control the property for a period of time. I don't need to worry too much about the settlement of the project at the very, very start, but rather I can progress the project, run the development. I can get a soft equity uplift by getting that development approval condition in place, and I might be able to get a commercial lender to come in and help to lend the construction element because I've now added value to the property. So there's lots of different ways. There's 7 different ways that we can do creative acquisition and control the property in some way, shape, or form that's going to solve one of those 3 challenges. Okay, we call them no or low money down methods. Now, with commercial lending, which I guess is not a no or low money down method, but what it does is it doesn't look at your serviceability, but rather it looks at the potential profit of the deal, and they're lending against the profit of the deal and not against your serviceability, because they understand that you're going to be in and out. Now, for all of those, what we're basically doing is bringing someone else along on the journey and sharing those profits with them, because they're seeing the manufactured profits that we're actually using in the process, and they are able to I guess, use their money or their resources to actually help us. So the example, it's the vendor that's actually helping us. We could have a money partner. It's the money partner's resources actually helping us. So all sorts of things like that can actually help you. So I guess to answer your question, you could do it with absolutely zero. We see plenty of people that actually do it with zero by using completely other people's money and the controlling outcomes. Or you might have just enough to actually run the deal. So for a small 1 into 2 subdivision, could be anywhere between $80,000 and say $150,000 to run the deal. By the time you do your applications, your civil services, your council contribution fees, those sorts of things, they may be enough to actually get you there. Or you could need to fund the entire project from start to finish. So it all comes down to, can you control the property and force the value on, or do you want to think in the more traditional way where you actually want to purchase the property? And my encouragement is the more you can, the more deals you can do with limited amounts of funds. So hoping that helps. Next question comes from Brian. Brian's in Victoria, and he says, with the new zoning rules that have come into place in Victoria, specifically HCTZ zone, which has been introduced over the old GRZ zone, in most of the old sites where 4 townhouses possible, now in many instances we can get 10 dwellings on the same land size. However, with no proven track record on that density, how can we assess whether it will sell well? So, Bran, you have, my friend, and that is, are you mature enough developer to actually understand how to read the market cycle? And if you know how to read the market cycle, you'll understand where the market is going, even with minimal evidence. Now, there is a development cycle that you need to understand and bring a deal. Lots of people doing deals and no one doing a deal again. So as you start to come in, no one doing deals, one person has to do the very first deal. We're going to call them the market maker. Now, they are either an absolute genius because they understand the entire cycle, or they are just taking a stab in the dark. For a genius, you'll understand what's going to come next, and you'll understand the symptoms that have actually started to make that deal start to work in the first place. But then what happens after the market maker comes in is we start to see early adopters see the market maker make money, and they go, well, we can make money too, and they start to come in. Then what the general public who live in the area, I'm going to call them Joe Public, they start to see deals happening, so they start to get involved. Now, at this point, they're being emotional. They're not putting the same science that we do from a development perspective. They start to get emotional and start to push the price point up. Deals don't make sense anymore, and then they start to drop off the other side. At this point here, Joe Public is still getting involved, but he doesn't realize that the market is starting to cook. And then as we start to come down, we've got taxi drivers seeing all this construction happening, thinking the area is fantastic, and they're telling you that this is a great place to invest. And then finally, I guess we get out the other side. What we really want is we want enough evidence of the early adopters, and before the market makers, there's a sweet spot in there where we can cookie cutter and follow the footsteps of others. Now, if you are doing that, then you're going to be seeing evidence of other people come before you. If you are not doing that, then you are going to be the market maker. And exactly what you've touched on, there is no evidence at this point in time. So what you need to understand is, if you've read the market cycle many, many times through many, many other deals, and you can actually see the patterns that are actually sitting there, can you see that right now is one of those times where the market is about to take off? Now, if you are doing that, if you've not learned to read the market in that sort of fashion, then you are really just taking a crapshoot, mate, and taking a stab in the dark. And my strong guidance is to be very, very careful and slow down, do a couple of other smaller deals where you analyze the market, get to know exactly what those patterns of the data are. And then once you do, data tells a story. And if you can read that story, it's like the Matrix. When all the ones and zeros start coming down, you can see that this is a door, this is a corridor, this is a doorway. You can see exactly what's coming. You can see the bullets coming, and you kind of ricochets coming, just like Neo did. If you can do all of that, then and only then do you want to be a market maker, my friend, because otherwise it is just extraordinarily dangerous. My guidance, let a couple of other people do some deals before you, then follow in their footsteps. Now, take a little bit of time, given that all the zoning has only just happened. So be very extraordinarily careful right now, unless you're a very seasoned developer, my friend. Next question comes from Christine. Christine says, I'm a bit hesitant to start as it's all new. I've looked at property development, but I've never been able to get anywhere. So Christine, you're not alone. Let me tell you that our community has over 36,500 people that, just like you, have started exactly where you are. And no matter how big a developer you see out there, whether they be the Mirvacs, the Lendleases, the Meritons, all those sorts of things, every single one of them had to do deal number one, and they were sitting in the exact same spot that you are right now. What I want you to see is that if you follow the footsteps of others, evidence leads a trail. And if you follow the trail, then that is going to take you to the place that you want to go. Be patient. Understand that this is effectively learning a new career, and it's not about the fact that you want instant gratification, but rather you're going to give it the due diligence that it deserves, or the due justice, I should say, to say, how do I learn this new approach, understand all the nuances and challenges that are actually going to sit here, okay? Now, from a risk perspective, Warren Buffett famously said, risk only comes from not knowing what you're doing. So my strong guidance is to take some time to actually get to know what is actually involved. Come to some of our events. We run events all the way. We run them in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And there are members of our community and students of mine that are actually sharing with you real deals. So that is, you get to learn from what went right and what went wrong on someone else's deal, so that you don't make those very, very same mistakes. Okay. We also have a free course that you 7-step formula to financial freedom. That is very, very worthwhile to do in order to start your development journey. And if you then find that with all of that, you can actually, you feel that it is something that you then want to embark on, then we also have a 12-month education program and explore and see whether or not that's something that that is what might be for you. But my strong encouragement, come to the events first. That is, come to a local event, see some real deals, start to communicate with people that were just like you, and see how far they've come. Follow the footsteps of them. How did they get to where they want to be? And then you're going to start to see that it's possible for you, and very, very easy to achieve. That what you need to learn is easy. The effort is hard, and the duration takes a little while. This is not rich quick, it is get rich, and you need to actually put some effort into the learning phase of your outcomes. So be patient with that, I would say, Angela. So, sorry, not Angela, Christine, I think that was. Next question. Suzanne says, hi, Rob. What's a rough estimate of money that I would need to start up? Legals, of course. Is there anything else that I need to be aware of? So, Suzanne, we just touched on this question just a couple of moments ago with Angela, but effectively, you can do it with little to no money. But of course, the more money that you have, the easier things actually are. But here's the interesting number here. Let's just cash that you need in the world. You get into deal number one. Now all your cash is tied up. Deal number two comes along, and you're going to need to know one of those low or no money down strategies anyway. Otherwise, you can't do deal number two until deal number one completely finishes. So you're going to start to learn these no and lids as the critical step in how you can force value onto the property by controlling it and not owning it. Okay, but if you are insistent on doing it with your own cash, then you need to understand, where does the particular strategy you want to do make sense? Now you're going to find, let's hypothetically say, duplexes. You can do duplexes in a super cheap suburb, okay, where you might have a buy price of 800 or $1 million in order to get in, and the construction price might be a lower quality product, so it might only be $700,000 or $800,000 to build the duplex. So you could get in and out relatively cheap. but you could build the exact same duplex type product, and you could go do that in a very affluent area, and the buy price might be $2.5 million, and the construction price might be $1.5 million for the duplex. And so the costs vary significantly. So it's not what you want to do, but rather find an area, particular thing starts to make sense, understand the demographic of that particular area, what is the product type that they need and the quality that they need, and then follow in the footsteps of others and see what have other people what have other people constructed, the quality, who are the builders working in that area, and you kind of work backwards. Once you've found an area that actually starts to make sense, we call that, we have a process that we teach in our 12-month program called the suburb selection process. That suburb selection process finds areas where you can buy on average, run an average deal, and sell on average and still make money. And if you can do that, that's going to give you all inputs that you need. How much money do you want? Sorry, not how much money do you want, how much money do you need in order to get in? But in short, deposit, serviceability, liquid cash are the starting positions that you would need if you're thinking in a traditional way. If you think in a non-traditional way with no and low money down methods, then what can you do to defer the settlement, in which case you might not need the serviceability for some period of time. You may only need deposit. So a delayed settlement with early access, for example. Or you might do a JV with the landowner, in which case you don't need the deposit or the serviceability, but you only need the liquid cash. What happens if you do an option contract? Well, you need that later in the process, once you've already forced value onto the property. You might get a money partner come in and you still need deposit and serviceability, but it's not you funding those things. So there's lots of ways to solve the problem. The key thing here is to actually understand what do you want to do and where. When you understand that, that will then tell you how much money is needed for that deal in that location. And then understand the vendor's needs. What is the challenge that the vendor wants? Too many times an agent is telling us they want to sell fast and they want cash in their pocket today. In reality, that's not. What we may find is that they have not yet purchased the next property, and what they need is time. They need time to find that place, and they need certainty to know what the sale is, so they know how much money they've got to spend. But they don't want to be kicked out on the street, and they don't want to be renting for 6 months while they try and work it out. Sometimes they want it, and we can use that time to our advantage. When we understand these criteria, there's 4 different criteria. There's time, there's certainty, there's risk, and then there's money. And if we understand where they sit on those 4 things, then that's how we negotiate on our no and low money down methods. Now, watch this. Very soon, we're going to be releasing a short course on the low and no money down methods, and we're going to tell you the kinds of things, how you can actually unlock those opportunities. So hold that space. It's going to happen very, very soon. Now, next question comes from Daniel. Daniel's consists of modern methods of construction suppliers and pattern books that I can use to build a 2-story townhouse format. So Daniel, I guess this goes back to an answer that I had a little bit earlier on in the process. So let's start with what you're calling the pattern book. And I just want to frame this so everybody actually knows what a pattern book is. A pattern book is a pre-approved design where the government says if you can build that design, then that is pretty much an automatic approval process. Now, the only state that has done the pattern book in any meaningful way is New South Wales, and they've got 17 different patterns. And if you do any one of those 17 different patterns, then it's pretty much an automatic approval process. Now, they can be customized somewhat, but the majority of those have been designed in such a way that they can use modern methods of construction to actually get constructed. Now, whilst New South Wales recognises the fast track approval of that, in theory, you could use those same patterns in any state. You just may not get the benefit of the fast track approval. Okay, so you could use the constructability of this, the modern methods of construction design timelines to actually do that. Now, what I see as a change in the entire industry is we're going to start to get standardized designs that are customizable. Maybe we can make the rooms a little bit wider. Maybe we can make them a little bit deeper for larger blocks and that sort of thing, where we can actually fit things, I guess, still in a bespoke way. But the majority of the componentry is going to come from a kit of parts that are standardized parts. So the side wall of the house will always be the same side wall of the house. The rear house windows will always be the same. The bathrooms will always be the same. Now, when I say always the same dimensions, okay? So if we can imagine a bathroom, we could have the same dimension bathroom. Perhaps it's a 3 meter by 2 meter bathroom, but maybe the toilet is located at one end or the other, the showers but the plumbing that goes into that is always going to be the same, the standard way that it's actually plugged in. So the factory can build the shell of that bathroom and you can plonk that in what they call a bathroom pod. So off a catalog, you can say, what are the dimensions of the bathroom? And of the 3 that bathroom would I consider? And then from top of that, do I want square basins or round basins? Do I want gold taps or silver taps? Everything comes off of a catalog, but like Lego, when you take the same components of a Lego, you can actually put that into many different designs. So it looks very bespoke every single time, but we've put catalog items to actually build it. Now with Lego, you can build an 800-pound gorilla, you can build the Eiffel Tower, but it's the same components that actually goes into it. So we can get very custom bespoke outcomes just by understanding how the interfaces between these components are going to plug together in a meaningful and repeatable way so that it's easy to assemble them on site. So at the moment, New South Wales is the only one with a pattern book, but from a constructability perspective, there are manufacturers in every single state that can do the actual manufacturing of it. Now, I'm just going to start to rattle off a number of them. This is in no particular order and in no, I'm not trying to single out any particular companies, but I just want to give you some ideas that there are plenty of them out there. So there's House, Homes, Shelter. We've also got people like DWTT, the Greater Group, Invisa, Arkit. We've got JMB, Modscape, Todd Devine, EcoLive, Arkit again. We've also got Bellevue, we've got Modern Pods, got Ollie Home, we've got S North, we've got Sarah Constructions, we've got Shape, and a whole bunch more. So this is just giving you some insights. That's just out of a basic Google search saying prefab and modular suppliers around the country. So it's a relatively simple concept. Once you actually have your design, then you're going to go, which one of those 4 technologies is the one that you want to use? And then you're going to say, which particular suppliers in my area build to that methodology. So volumetric, panelized, bit of parts, the summation method being 3D printing. Okay, so hoping that helps, Daniel. Next one, Tony. Tony says, I have my own real estate business, but have always wanted to get involved with developments. I have some experience of developments as I've worked with some of my clients before with this. What strategy is a great one to start with? For example, a splitter block. So, Tony, here's the challenge here, mate. I cannot legally tell you what to do. I understand what you're trying to ask of me, but I can't tell you what to do here, mate. What I can say is you want to start with the end in mind. In 5 years' time, what is the kind of project that you would like to be doing in 5 years' time? So some people want to be building apartments, some people want to be doing townhouses, some people want to be building in entire streets, whatever that is. Whatever you see yourself as when you grow up, I wanted to be an astronaut when I grew up. So the question is, what is a small version of that you can do today? So if you want to be doing large lot subdivisions where you're building roads and doing master plan communities and all that sort of thing, then a splitter block might be the starting point for you. Now, a splitter block is one of the simplest projects you can do. It's 2 lots already on one title, separate the house, sell 2 vacant blocks of land. If the house is well located, It might be that when you separate the title, the house actually sits on one of those titles all by itself. This is not a development application. It's a pre-approved, pre-approved lots that were done many years, locking that at the titles office. That is certainly one approach, but is not the only approach. If you know where you want to go, then you want to start heading that direction today. Now, I don't know where you're located, but if you're located in Sydney, and if you want to head to Brisbane, you don't start, okay? So if you know where you want to end up, you're going to start to head in that direction. So if you want to go to Brisbane, you can get there on a couple of paths. You can go inland, which might be the faster route, or you can go the scenic way via the coastline and actually enjoy the view along the way. But either way, you know where you're headed, so you're going to head north. And every time you take a wrong direction, it's very easy for you to then recalculate with your GPS and actually turn in the right direction. The key goal is to know where do you want to get. It also is understand where I am right now, so I actually calculate the pathway that I need to go to learn the skills in order to get to where I want to get to, okay? So when we talk about our property development formula, and when we talk about our 7 steps to financial freedom, and this is the 7 steps, it is all about understanding where is it that I want to go, break that down into bite-sized, and then slowly execute one step at a time in order to actually get ourselves there. So without telling you what to do, who do you want to be? And that's probably the biggest guidance that I can give you without telling you what to do. So hoping that helps. The next question comes from Hua. Hua says, I read your article about prefab building with interest. I'm planning at developing a property in Geraldton in WA. Do you know any reputable prefab construction companies in that area? So not specifically in Geraldton, but there are plenty in Western Australia. But what you'll find with all the prefab is you can stick that on a truck and get it there very fast. One of the great things about prefab is the fact that it means that where there are low skills in a particular regional area, then we can get the majority of the construction done in a factory, in a controlled environment, and what they're doing is just assembling on sites. Okay, so that helps massively in actually getting you where you want to go. The next question comes from Rick. Rick says, I've submitted my development approval and the council takes almost 12 months to issue a DA. This is a 5 townhouse project with a build cost expected at 2.6 million. So expect to start construction in 12 months, and it should then take another 12 months to finish. Considering the increase in fuel costs and corresponding increases by material suppliers, what would be an appropriate increase in build costs that I should factor into my FISO? Thank you very much, says Rick. Rick, this is a really tricky one, mate, because over time, there are going to be many things that actually come into our world that cause hiccups in the construction timeline. So we recently had COVID, we've had the GFC, we've had world wars, we've had all sorts of things that cause things to go up that are outside of the control of the local economy. Okay, so those things have happened many times. We had the Y2K bug and all sorts of things like that. Now, what I can tell you is that every single one of them, when you look at the long run of time, every single one of them were a blip on the horizon, okay? And so there were some short-term pain points, but long-term, the market kept growing. And so depending upon your execution timeline, you may find that it's one of those things where maybe the impact of construction means you don't want to pull the trigger today, but rather you want to wait for the economy to pick back up so that the price points recover in order to compensate for the fact that those construction costs have gone up. Because when construction costs go up, then in order for that, you have to sell at a higher price point, and eventually that price point actually is achieved and the deal actually starts to make sense again. So it's a pull and push type scenario that's going to happen over time. Now, that said, I guess economists that specialize in the construction process are all hedging their bets on what they're trying to predict here, given that they don't know the duration of this war. Some of them are saying it's only going to last another couple of weeks, in which case it's all going to be over very, very fast. Some of them are saying it could go for several years. So range that is anywhere from a 5 to a I'm going to say a 10 to 12% increase in construction costs is everything that I've seen over the next 12 months or so. Now, when it goes up, despite the fact that it's a temporary measure because of fuel, when fuel costs come down, I don't see the construction coming. Suppliers are going to use that as a justification to keep their margins at a higher price point. So I can't see construction costs coming down again, but I would certainly see that 5 to 10% mark happening over the next little while. But equally, supply and demand in Australia is such that I also see the property market going up by the same sorts of price points. So if we're going up 5 to 10% in a sales perspective, then I think that that's actually going to also cause a little bit of a recovery. Now, there is again a blip in that regard with inflation at the moment and adding to those inflation costs. So I think we're going to have a short-term lull where we're going to see the market go backwards as interest rates go up and the affordability of properties starts to go down a little bit. But then it's going to find an equilibrium in the not too distant future and then take off again, because supply and demand underlying fundamentals that are actually sitting there have not changed. They are still the same. Supply and demand, we've got a massive undersupply, and we've got a massive demand for finished products. So I do not see that changing in the near future. So, okay, next question from AB. So AB says, I'm looking for knockdown rebuild projects, preferably in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. What are some key things to consider when sourcing a site, and what do buyers in those areas look for? So AB, if you're looking to do a very basic project for a knockdown rebuild, the biggest thing that I would suggest to you is you want to be having a very, very clear understanding of the demographics of the area. Okay, there are some areas where the demographics are empty nesters, and so they're just people who are downsizing and they don't want the hassle factor of the maintenance of properties and things like that. So smaller might be better for them. You've also then got other areas where you've got young families who want big backyards and the like. Then you've got more affluent areas where what they're looking for is a finished product that's got some wow factor. So every different area has got a very, very different demographic and of type. Now, what you need to understand is, what is that demographic? What's the age group? How many children are likely to be there? What's the income level of those people? Now, income level is super important because that's going to tell you the maximum buying power that they've actually got to actually purchase in the area. Now, depending, they may have purchased property in the past, they may have a whole bunch of equity that they can roll over into this, so their borrowing power may not necessarily need to buy for the entire house. But if I understand, for example, baby boomers, now they bought 3 or 4 property sites ago, a bunch of equity coming in, they don't need to borrow anywhere near as much. But equally, their timeline to borrow and pay that loan back is also much shorter. So we need to think about all of this, and we can get majority of this from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. There are also a number of other sites that actually take the ABS stats and they turn it into a much easier to digest format. So there's Profile ID, there's Suburb Trends, there's a whole bunch of others like that that actually give it to you in a more graphical interface, makes it a little bit more easy to digest and actually start to comprehend. And then once you understand that demographic, then and only then decide what is the kind of product they're actually looking for. Is it a high spec home? Is it a low spec home? How many bedrooms is it going to be? Perhaps if it's an aging generation, if it's going to be 2-story, you need to have a lift. And if you can't put a lift in today, at least have the ability to retrospectively put a lift in while sitting there that's already been electrically cabled and all those sorts of things. You want to start to think about that stuff, okay? And so you are supplying for them to actually cater for the needs of not just today, but where they're going to be in 10, 15 or 20 years, should they stay in the same home. Okay, Next question comes from Steve. Steve says, I've got a fire hydrant located in a driveway where I'm doing a development, and I'm considering purchasing the property on this large block of land with the potential to develop in the future by building 2 homes side by side. However, I've noticed that the fire hydrant is located on the nature strip exactly where I plan to place the driveway. Have you dealt with this situation before? Can a driveway be built in this location, or will the hydrant need to be relocated? So, Steve, depending upon where you are, there is a strong likelihood that you will need to relocate it. Most of your utility providers do not like the idea of your fire hydrant being what they call trafficable, i.e., having a 2 or 3 ton vehicle drive over it on a regular basis. That said, there are some jurisdictions that allow it. So you have a particular jurisdiction as to what is allowed. Now, talking to your civil engineer is going to give you the answer to this. But as a worst case scenario, if you consider that it has to be relocated, it's a relatively minor expense to relocate it, depending upon the kind of hydrant that's, and it could be as little as $2,000 or $3,000, and it could be as high as $10,000 to actually relocate that, say 5 to 10 meters from where it currently is. You've already got the water line there. You've already got the correct amount of pressure, those sorts of things. So it's like you're having to run in, but rather you'd be patching up the current hydrant location and relocating that to a new one, and basically just moving it down the line just a tiny bit. So it shouldn't be that big a deal. Your civil engineer, either way, he is both the person that will actually tell you not it is a land area. He's also going to be the one that's doing the design. He's also going to be the one that gets all the approvals from your utility provider to make it happen, and he's going to be the one that coordinates the construction. So he's the one who's going to be able to tell you for your specific circumstances the exact cost of what that's going to be. But generally, it's not a showstopper with regards to the project. Okay. Now, that said, lucky last question. Sorry, there's one more to go. My bad. So Andrew says, I'm currently assessing a potential development site and have noted that a neighbouring property has lodged a development application for a 90-place childcare centre. I'd be interested to hear if you've encountered a similar situation and whether or not this can actually be a deal breaker. My concern is whether the type of adjacent use could adversely affect the marketability of resale values. What are your thoughts? This is super interesting, Andrew, and you've highlighted a really good one in that adjacent uses of any kind of development can have adverse effects on yourself. Equally, it can also have an uplift. Now, being a childcare centre, for someone who has children, then the ability to walk to the childcare centre actually is of value to them. If you don't have children, that may not be. So for different people, different perspectives will actually see that as problematic or not problematic. Now, some people are going to see that the children are going to make a whole bunch of noise during the day, and that if they're quite annoying, whereas other people see actually it's operating as a business, and I know that come 6 o'clock, every single kid is gone, and at night I'm going to have peace and quiet and everything's going to be fantastic. So you're going to find 50% of the people that are not going to like it, and 50% of the people who probably do like it because they're coming at it from a very, very different perspective. Now, I don't think it will actually have a material impact on the price point, but I think it will probably have an impact on the number of people that are competing for the deal, because some people will see it as an objection and other people will actually see it as a positive. And so I don't think it's going to create, I guess, bigger concerns for you in the long run, other than perhaps not quite as many buyers as you would like. Now, in a depressed market, that is something that you may have a little bit of concern about, that you may be eliminating, 30% or 50% of your buyers. But in a uplifted market, I wouldn't see that as an issue at all. What it really comes down to is your real estate agent understanding what the challenge is and being able to present that in the right light to that buyer at that point in time by understanding the buyer's circumstances and their position and knowing how they can actually pitch that. So I don't see it as the deal killer that you might be seeing there, mate. So now, lucky last question comes from Rebecca. Rebecca says, I'm buying land in a new subdivision and planning on putting multi-units in. Can I submit the development approval to council with the approval being subject to the previous plan of registration? In this particular instance, Rebecca is buying a block of land off another developer. They're doing a subdivision, and they might, in this instance, might be doing 50 blocks of land. She is buying one of those blocks of land and wanting to put another development over the top of that. Now, a lot of developers will actually do this because they want to get in and out as quick as they can, and selling the land means that they can get in and out of Dodge as quick as they can and still leave some money on the table for people like Rebecca to come and do some deals afterwards. Now, each council is going to deal with this very, very slightly differently, but from the majority of them will be understanding of what's actually happening, and they'll see there is an existing development approval already in place. And so let's just say it's proposed lot 20. And I'm just making up a number there. If it's proposed lot 20, when you do your development application, you'd be doing it subject to the title being issued on proposed lot 20 per the previous development application, ABC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so your town planner would be able to lodge that and say, look, subject to that one being, in force, can we do subsequent application at this point in time? Now, the tricky part isn't whether you can get the development application in line. Okay, the tricky part is at what point can you actually commence the construction process. Okay. And so that it might be that the council's development approval conditions on your application says that the previous application must be completed and the plan of subdivision lodged and the title actually created before you can actually commence works. But there might be some of those works, like the sewer and the stormwater and those sorts of things, that you may want to get in early, and even current developer, and say, look, you're already putting some services in. I'll give you a little bit of extra cash if you can just plug them in the same capability that I'm actually looking for. So it can work to your advantage, and some councils are going to be quite supportive and receptive of those. So just be conscious of that. I would be talking to my town planner, making sure that that particular council is supportive. I've found that, I guess, of all the instances where I've seen that occur before, majority of councils are quite supportive of the outcome. They all have a housing shortage problem at the moment. Most of them are understanding. Developers are trying to act in the fastest possible way, so they will have some prerequisite conditions on the previous development application being completed, but other than that, it should actually work. There you have it, folks. That is another open mic night session. We generally hold these on the first Sunday of every single month. If you want to submit your questions, click on the link below, propdev.info/open-mic. We would love to help you on your property development journey. That said, we would also like to see you at one of our upcoming events. We run these all the way around the country. We run them Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide is just around the corner. We're launching in Perth in May with our very, very first session there. At that point, we'll be running 55 of these meetups per year, with most weekends of the year having a meetup of some shape or form. Industry experts, town planners, civil engineers, architects, property lawyers, and the like, and also members of our community and previous students of mine sharing real deals that are showing you how to execute a deal in today's market. And that is the most important part. Plus, hang around for a few drinks and that sort of thing. Hoping that you got plenty out of today's show, folks, and hope to see you in meetings. Till then, bye for now. Bye.